Today, we are so excited to have Nan Yu on Source's AI Product Kitchen. Nan is the head of product of Linear, which has become the modern golden standard for the highest performing tech teams like OpenAI, Scale AI, and Ramp. In today's episode, we go deep on Nan's approach to developing AI products, what it's like to take on industry giants like Jira and Asana, and how Linear is supercharging the next generation product team with AI. Nan, we are so excited to have you on AI Product Kitchen.
Thanks for having me. I've been really looking forward to it.
I want to start with your customer, True Product Style. If we fast forward 5 years, what is one thing that product and engineering teams are doing today that will feel so obviously archaic?
I think probably going through a lot of manual, like kind of laborious processes to label their fox, right? Whether that's issues or project ideas or these big old spreadsheets. I think that we put a lot of effort today into building kind of complex taxonomies or different cuts for different dimensions, and I don't think you're going to have to do this in the future.
I talk to so many product leaders every day about shipping more output faster. And when I talk to you and about specifically building better products, it's so clear that you believe making the right decision is more important than writing more PRDs or writing more code. How did you come to this conclusion? And what advice would you give to other product leaders to help them optimize their strategic decisions rather than just thinking about velocity?
Yeah, I think what often happens is we get caught in people call it the build trap or something, right? Where we think that the next feature is going to be the thing that solves all of our problems, and we don't necessarily pay close enough attention to like having a point of view that's coherent because I think what often happens is you have some initial success, the company gets very big, you have a lot more people, and then you start shipping a lot more stuff, which as much as anything will create a lot more problems than, as much as it solves your existing ones. So I think that just focusing on shipping more stuff from a product manager's point of view is not necessarily about the thing you should be optimizing for.
When you think about decision making in general, like what goes into an actual decision? And I guess the bigger question here is Linear's mission is to give clarity around decision making, take away ambiguity. So what does that actually mean for a product team today?
For most product teams, like it starts with some sort of research exercise, whether that's, going on a customer tour or kind of picking up all of the feedback that people have been are kind of giving you and whittling that down to what is the actual fundamental problem that people are presenting us with, and it's sort of what's the solution space, right, that we can explore to try to solve those problems. And I think, when we reward just purely building stuff or outputting, ideas and things like that, you can kind of miss uh, the signal, right, and all that research. If you just kind of grab the first idea that comes to mind, or focus more of your attention on making the case for something rather than trying to figure out if that's like actually the right thing to build.
You see a lot of product teams doing their work in Linear today, some of the highest performing in the world. I'd love to understand two cases. What does the bear case look like? What does lack of clarity look like for a product team? And then we'll flip and say, what does total clarity look like for the highest performing product teams? Are there any patterns you can share between those two cases?
Yeah, I think the lack of clarity it manifests in a very sort of specific way, which is like the thing we build is the thing we just thought of, right? And like and if you don't have a sort of lineage of thinking, right, both across time and across like different different ones of view, then usually what you're going to end up kind of reaching for is the thing that we just thought of last week, right, or the thing we just noticed that users are doing, and part of this comes because of human nature, because you have these they're in your mind, right, so that they're just easier to grasp. But part of it is because of the systems that we're using, right? Because like, we've all had this experience of like you have an idea, you put it in the backlog, we go, yeah, we should really consider that later, and then it just gets lost forever. Right. Like, maybe you had this idea 6 months ago or last year, and it's kind of like lost into a black hole, and it's never to be found again. And at some point you declare bankruptcy and then you can throw it all away.
Hmm. What is the role of a backlog in a modern product team?
I think for, the honest answer is for a lot of people, it's like a safety blanket, right? It's something where you're like, I know that we were pretty, it was us in the past. We were pretty smart. We thought about these ideas and we'll put it into this backlog saying that, hey, future us is going to do something about it. And so you know that there's something valuable in there, but it's not it's not something you want to let go of, right? You kind of want to hold on to it, but it's so inaccessible that that's really the only role it's playing. It's giving you the sort of psychological safety of like, hey, like one day we can get into this backlog and actually like find the real gold nuggets and kind of bring them out and actually deploy them.
I would just say that's changing. You mentioned some fascinating ideas, some conversation yesterday about Linear having a wealth of data in the backlog, feedback, ideas, decisions, all kinds of things. And access was a really key thing, but then actually being able to re-leverage that over time. How would you say that's actually changing? And more broadly, what is the actual AI opportunity to actually leverage this data?
Yeah. So I think that you kind of have to start with like what is the starting point? Like how are people able to to whatever small degree like utilize this information today? And a big part of that is you have to sort of predict the future a little bit, right? You think about like, hey, like how are we gonna organize our backlog in such a way where like at the moment some ticket goes into it, we kind of put it into the right bucket so that at least, when we kind of go back to think about it, we can like choose the broad bucket and pull the issues out and kind of read them sequentially, right? Even if we have to read 100, kind of ideas, it's better than reading 10,000 ideas that you've accumulated over time. And the problem with this is it kind of freezes you in time for what your thinking was the moment you created that taxonomy, and every single time you have to categorize an issue, it takes some incremental amount of work, right? So you have this this unreliability about like if our thinking evolves, then maybe that old taxonomy doesn't make sense anymore for how we think about it. And also it costs us a lot of sort of attention and diligence to make sure that we're like kind of doing this right. And you see companies kind of struggling uh, with both aspects of that, right? Either like you're not necessarily consistent, or when two people do the categorization, they kind of come at it from slightly different points of view and they don't really use the same standards. But also that your thinking has changed, and the sort of old ways of thinking about how to structure the ideas are different. And either you just declare bankruptcy and you say, oh well, I guess this is not useful to us anymore, or you kind of like make do and you're like, well, I'm to the best of our ability we're going to try to force fit it into this old way of thinking. And then it kind of like inadvertently freezes your thought like in time, right, in that sort of past moment.
Can you take us, you've mentioned this word taxonomy a few times. I'd love to go a little bit deeper. Like, what is a taxonomy? And more broadly, like, what is the old way of thinking about this?
Yeah, a taxonomy is just a way of sort of organizing your ideas in a way that you can grasp them and utilize them sort of in aggregate, right? Like maybe I have 10 ideas about how triage should work inside of linear, and maybe I can pick a category called triage, and any time I have an idea about triage, I can put it into that bucket. So that's like the way that we make these ideas sort of usable for future us, right? For future versions of ourselves when we're kind of looking back and say like, hey, like, I think it's time to make some triage improvements. What should I do? The problem with that is it locks you into these relatively broad categories. Like triage, it's a whole feature set inside of point error. It doesn't say anything about is it what aspects of it? Is it the individual triage process? Is it how you manage who's responsible? Right. If I think about, hey, I want to have a system where I use an external integration like like incident IO or something like that to manage who's responsible for triage, then does it belong in the triage bucket, or does it belong in the integration bucket, or does it belong in the incident response bucket? Right? There's all sorts of different ways that you could possibly think about this. And if so the problem is if you try to think about all possible categories, then the laborious process of categorizing these issues is impossible, right? And it just costs way too much to categorize every idea. And if you're too narrow about it, then when future you comes and says like, hey, I wanna kind of really focus on the incident response idea, then you're never gonna be able to find those things that got bucketed into triage in the first place, right? So like that's sort of where the inherent tension lies.
Take us on this journey a little bit. Like, what was that moment when you realized there were actual problems with this older way of thinking? And how did that slingshot you into like, what is the new way of doing things and guiding teams on that actual journey?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like a big part of this comes from past experiences at different companies. I've seen people try to do this, and I've tried to do it myself. Where like, hey, we're gonna have this really great system of organizing all of our ideas, and then we're gonna put them into the right little folders and drawers. You see people do this in other tools like project management tools like Asana, or like in things like Notion, where that we have documents and potential product ideas, and you put them into buckets, and it just never works.
Mm.
Right? It never works because you can't. You're never as diligent as you hope to be. You're never as consistent as you hope to be, because as soon as it becomes more than one person doing the categorization, then you have all this inconsistency. And then your thinking evolves, right? So like, well, I've seen this happen over and over again. Everyone goes into this process with this idea of like, this is what we want to do. And we hear it from our customers too, right? And, people ask us for things like, oh, custom fields, right? We need a custom field to do A and then B and C dimension. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, because in the future, when we think about the product, those are the dimensions that I think matter. It's like you think that today, but once next year comes, right, and then there's a whole new wave of technology, you're going to think about your product totally differently. And all of that work that you went through to create this custom dimension and categorize everything, it's not going to be helpful for you anymore.
One thing I found fascinating when we were talking before is when you take customers on this journey of behavioral shift, there is selling of future value and trying to get people to understand this in this taxonomy example, like what is the problems you will encounter in the future and what is the ultimate future value of being able to get these new perspectives on data. And one thing I really liked that you mentioned was the idea of on ramps. And so love to dive into that. What does an on ramp mean to you?
Yeah, there's this concept called most advanced yet acceptable, right? In Maya, it's like a term people use. And what it really means is like you have a new way of doing things, but you want to like kind of disguise it all as, right? And something that people find familiar and something people can get sort of immediate value from. So our first sort of pass at this is the most basic form of taxonomy, which is like duplicate detection, right? If this is something that people have a very good sense of, right? And anyone who's managed like a feature backlog knows that like a lot of times people come to the same idea. And if they come to the same idea, then you don't want multiple copies of this because then your conversation gets spread out over multiple places, and you think that you're dealing with one particular issue, but then you're like, hey, where's the con I left? It's like no, it's on a different one that's basically the same thing. So our first pass at this is going to be like giving people really really good um duplicate detection, right? And also giving the tools to sort of combine those different issues when people have different ideas and make sure that all of the context that people have brought to the system, whether it's different customers asking for the same thing or different sort of mock-ups that people have made or different ideation that people have had and conversations, we'll like bring it all into the same place and kind of combine all those duplicates so you have like the full context of how your entire organization has thought of this idea. And this could mean that, you have one office in New York and you have another office in San Francisco and two people have the same idea and that they don't even have to know that the other person exists. But the fact that they had the same idea is what kind of brings them together, connects them, right? So we're not just bringing the ideas together, we're bringing the sort of like, the originators of those ideas. So to make sure that they know about each other. Hey, you guys have thought about the same thing. So maybe you should, have a conversation and figure out like if you can create some kind of some kind of synthesis of what you're thinking about.
That's fascinating. I want to break down this customer journey. So you typically go up against incumbents, like issue tracking solution, like a Jira and Asana, one of these big golden standard tools. You have really nailed the IC workflow in general and really coming in at the IC level, proving value. I think the metric you use, which I want to dive into, is number of distinct issue creators. I really want to double click on that. But where do they really reach this aha moment of like duplication, seeing the value of that, and then taking them on the journey to like full web roller? Can you take us on that journey a bit?
Yeah, I think that there's like Linear is a very broad product, right? And it has a lot of different features for different kinds of personas. And ultimately, what we want to ensure is that everyone is able to add their own point of view into the system record that they know best, right? So if you're an engineer and you're doing the work, like you probably got the best beat on like how's it going? Are we done? Is it in progress? Are we completed with the particular task? Whereas if you're a project manager, you have maybe a more high level view of like, hey, what's the sort of next milestone that we're kind of shooting for? And if we're able to sort of bring all of these different people together, that's really where we can make sure that everyone is able to contribute to the same effort. And the problem that you see in a lot of maybe sort of like incumbent products is if you actually look at the usage data, it's not everyone adding their own point of view. It's just like one person opening all of the issues, assigning everybody, and then you kind of chasing them for status and then like closing all the issues themselves, right? So all of the actions are kind of taken by one member of the team. Maybe it's the project manager, maybe it's the engineering manager or somebody. So what we've sort of set for ourselves is like our promise is that the engagement, right, with Linear across your entire team of all the ICs is going to be much, much deeper than it is for, whatever solution you were using before. And this gives you a lot more benefit, right? It gives you the benefit of like, okay, everyone knows what's going on. It gives you the benefit of like, if the engineers are engaged and they see a problem, they will raise an objection, right? But the thing that, as a project manager you're deathly afraid of is, there was a problem, but I just didn't know about it. I didn't know about it until I asked, on Friday, which is when I usually ask, but the problem happened on Monday, and now there's like 4 days of like, well, I could have unblocked you, but you know, because you weren't engaged in the system, I just didn't know until I went and chased you for the status.
That's nice. So your metric is increasing the number of distinct issue creators, which means more engineers are creating more tickets, which go into a backlog, which means you have a wealth of backlog data.
Yeah,
If we go forward to your AI strategy, the way you framed this to me yesterday was step one,
yeah.
sharpen the actual data that exists today. And step two is enable synthetic actors to actually take action off the data. And so let's dive into step one first. You have this wealth of backlog data. What do you see as the AI opportunity here?
Instead of trying to predict the future and sort of creating these structures that you hope future versions of you are able to utilize, you can sort of have these structures be emergent or even just time, right? Like I can ask an AI system to sort of like, okay, like I know that we've thought about these issues in terms of like there's a triage bucket, but I really care about incident response right now. So go and find all of the issues that have to do with incident response. In fact, here's the design of the product I want to deal with for incident response. What are all the issues that customers have reported or ideas that we've had in the past that are related to this in any way possible, and also tell me how they're related. Right, like that exercise is something that PM teams sort of dream of being able to do, but they also know that it's probably a 2-week research process where they have to like assign a couple of junior PMs to read all the backlog and figure things out, and the results are a little bit kind of wonky, or maybe, if they think about it a little bit differently than you, then you have to do it again, right? There's all this risk and cost involved with doing that kind of a research project. But with something like, with your linear backlog and the addition of sort of AI powered search, it's something that you can just, kind of have at your disposal. You can have it on demand, and it'll, maybe take less than an hour to accomplish.
When we take forward to stage two, you said the actors in linear don't have to be human 100% of the time. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you think about platforms like linear, like fundamentally what we're doing is we're communicating, right? Like in linear, there's two directions of communication. There's the sort of uh giving, almost like giving orders, and sort of expressing intent, right? Like, hey, the plan is to do this project followed by this project on the roadmap, and then within this project, here are the three different kind of key requirements, right, so to speak. And that's sort of communicating outward of saying like, this is what we intend to do. And then there's the other side of it where like, when engineers use like a GitHub integration to close issues, right? The issue's closed. That means we've completed it. It's merged, right? You're kind of communicating back up, or if you're writing a project update, you're communicating back to the person who expressed the intent that like, hey, here's how it's going, right? Here's the progress that we've been making. Here's what's going on. So like you can think of linear as fundamentally these two directions of communication. And coincidentally, those are the same directions of communication that matter no matter like what kind of actor is on the other side of it, right? It could be a human programmer, building an issue, or it could be, an AI agent that is fixing bugs for you.
Mm.
Right? That if I create an issue and I label it as a bug, and I assign it to this agent, they can just pick it up, do the thing, and do the communication exactly the same way. Right? They don't have a face, they don't have a voice, but they can like communicate within a platform like Linear by changing issue statuses, moving things through the workflow, and even writing comments and things like that.
So we went into a few examples there. What do you think will be the first part of the workflow that will be taken by a synthetic actor or AI agent?
I think it's the way we have to slice it is not necessarily an entire part of the workflow. It's some percentage of the workflow,
Mm.
right? So if you think about self-driving cars as the sort of analogy, like self-driving cars can handle certain road conditions. They can handle certain climates. They can handle certain like complexities of having to deal with pedestrian traffic and things like that. Those are, that doesn't mean you're necessarily kind of isolated to being a taxi, or to being like to do trucking, or to sending kids to school and dropping them off and kids like that. Like those are specific use cases that may or may not overlap with the capabilities. So I think it's going to be more like that, right? What kinds of bugs can coding agents fix? What kinds of features can they produce? What kinds of kind of quality assurance workflows can they execute and sort of, you know, kind of do some fuzzy logic about like, well, this screen looks wrong. I think there might be like a UI regression or something like that. Those are all things that they can do, but it's probably for a subset of any of those activities, not the entire activity itself.
I think it was a double-digit percentage you said an AI agent will perform of the software development lifecycle. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly what we've been hearing from a lot of the, the folks who are developing these kinds of tools that they're all, obviously they're marketing their own products, but I think they're all very excited on in a very genuine way that they're going to be able to handle, double digit percentages of a lot of these steps of the workflow by, by the end of this year and certainly by next year.
What do you think is blocking this from happening today, us achieving double-digit percentage of an AI agent performing a software development workflow?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is honestly, a discovery process over what kind of capabilities these agents actually have. But I think the other part of it is it's like a real UX problem, which is, like there's so much. If you ask a data like, hey, is AI properly utilized or underutilized? It's like it's definitely underutilized, right? There's a lot of work it could be doing that it isn't doing because a lot of times we're locked into these interfaces that are very intimidating, right? Here's a blank, text box. Like tell it to do whatever it wants. Like what can it do? It can do anything, right? And then it just becomes a little bit challenging. Excuse me, to know how to interact with it in the first place. And even the process of like, well, I'm going to ask, Cloud Code to write code for me. I'm going to copy paste it back and forth. Like that UX is a little bit clunky. You want it to be committing directly to your repository, to be opening pull requests, doing everything that an independent human being can do. And what it needs in order to do that is to be able to interface with the same tools that we use, right? So if you think about, hey, you're building an AI environment, you can think about building using AI. I'm going to build features that are powered by AI, or you can think about building features to be used by AI. And a lot of times, I think it's that part that's really going to help unlock, a lot of the sort of agentic ideas that people have.
When you think about building AI products at Linear, it sounds like you've gone for the more augmentation approach. So layering AI agents or experiences into an existing workflow, and that's true partnership between the human and the AI. How do you actually think about experiences in general? And is that correct? You've gone down the augmentation approach?
I think when we just talk about the more agentic aspects, like we're sort of taking both approaches, right? We have some amount of we have a large volume of sort of textual data, and and we can do a good job of refining that and getting that to be like more useful for our users. But also, we have this concept of you know users and personas and members inside of Linear, right? Where like these are actors that are, like right now they're mostly human, right? That they're opening issues, they're closing issues, they're writing PRs and writing comments. Um, and there's no reason that those actors have to be purely human, right? So when we think about there's going to be a double-digit percentage contribution from AI agents, it's going to be through that particular vector that they're expressed, right? That you're going to have AI team members that are working alongside you that you can assign them to tasks that they can pick up ones of their own volition. They can kind of review your code, right? They can interact with you in every single way that you can interact with another person inside of Linear.
What's an example in Linear's context of how an agent could make a mistake?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Linear is a system of record, right? And we're and a communication platform. So as much as anything, it's not about an agent making a mistake in Linear. It's more about an agent doing something that a little bit unexpected in a production sensitive environment. And what we want to do is to be able to kind of offer you the points of communication where you can interject or kind of set boundaries or set blocking steps where it doesn't take a lot of human effort, but it takes some amount of sign off, right, for you to kind of okay whatever the agent is doing.
When you think about measuring success of AI products, and in particular, like if you take some traditional metrics in engineering, like cycle time, velocity of impacts, things like that, do you think those evolve or we start to rethink some of those things with agents, or do you think we're working towards the same way of actually measuring success here?
Yeah, I think that the way we think about engineering efforts has to evolve, because what ends up happening with any of these metrics is we're effectively trying to control for like what's expensive, right? Which today is like engineering attention, engineering time, and there are going to be new classes of things that uh, just aren't expensive anymore. So cycle time probably isn't applicable for those sorts of activities, right? You're more sort of concerned with just like correctness, right? And the how what's your take rate for different actions that the agent produced. Because and the sort of time aspect kind of shifts to a cost aspect, right? We know like we all of a sudden we have to deal with like the cost of reasoning and the cost of inference and things like that. So I think the economics of a lot of these sort of tasks ends up changing quite a bit.
What are some examples or advice you'd give to other product leaders about how we start to rethink business models in general?
I think like this it's a little bit too early in the game to give general advice for this. I think what's sort of been very apparent to us is as you start incorporating AI systems into your workflows, you're just all of your intuition around how these how the system works or the economics or what's easy and what's hard, they just shift. Which means that all of a sudden you start doing a lot of activities that you wouldn't have done in the past, right? And some activities that were, you're like, I can see how they're valuable, but it's gonna take some time and attention. It's probably not worth it. Like they become worth it, and and you go from doing none of it to just a lot of it. And I think that the ramifications of that have really not played out yet. So I don't know if I'd give any general advice there.
So it's fascinating your AI strategy is take the existing data, make it sharper, and then deploy agents which actually allow you to do actions off this data. How did you start to spin up teams to go after this? Can you take me on the journey on what this looked like for a experimentation perspective? You mentioned like all the AI efforts you run are like low cost experimentation. What does it actually look like there?
Yeah, yeah. I think so much of what we're doing right now is just building baseline intuition. And we have we have a lot of like experienced and talented product designers and developers and PMs and we have to be a little bit open and sort of humble that like we can't just kind of our first thought is probably not going to be right. So what we did was we kind of got a team of engineers and designers and Jory, one of the founders, is leading this team. And we just asked them to like, hey, here's some initial ideas. Let's just prototype these and start using them at scale, right? Like because we use our own product today. Let's just start using these and then like find moments where you're like, that was really useful. And then when we find those moments, we have to like really break it down. Like what was useful about it? Like what changed about how we did this process before, and then how do we like really zero in on that and utilize that moment to kind of turn that into a real feature that we can show to our customers. So it's a very kind of like bottoms up prototyping driven process, and we have like 4 different ideas running at the same time, and we're getting them to a stage where we can start using them at scale, and then we move on to the next idea, and then the ones that are it's almost like a tournament, right? The ones that are like really winning, we like take those and develop them further and getting them into beta and production.
Can you give me an example? Let's take a winner first. Like, what was an example of something you spun up as a project? What you defined as success? Like those moments that you actually look for and like, aha, that's actually doing something useful. We're gonna take this further.
Uh, yeah. So I think one of the things that we tried was different ways to aggregate project updates from around the organization. And so we have this feature in Linear, which is called project updates. And what it lets you do is just, give some kind of color commentary on like, hey, how is this project going? How do I feel about it? What's the traffic light? Is it red, yellow, green? How's it going? And for people who know exactly which projects they care about, they can just, they're very diligent about reading the updates and they feel like they're really informed. But reading updates is a little bit labor intensive, right? You have to kind of know, about like which updates do I want to go and there's a subscribe to and all that stuff. So instead of doing that, we kind of created a sort of like newsletter product, right? That just sends you an aggregation of like here's the updates that we think are relevant to you based on the projects that you're working on, the initiatives you're a part of, the teams that you're on. And we're going to give the sort of summarized version and let you drill deeper into any of these, right? So it's a different way of keeping on top of things where you don't have to be so purposeful, right? I think so much of the promise of AI is that you just don't have to have so much um, thought ahead of time to know how you want to set up your workflows, right? That the things that are relevant to you can be very emergent, and we can kind of push them to you instead.
What about the other case? Have you had any projects that you've killed or that just haven't been successful or haven't found that moment?
Yeah, I mean, like whether they're gonna find that moment is still up in the air, right? But like, a basic idea we had was like, hey, can we somehow kind of summarize the issue activity on a project to sort of generate these updates from scratch? And the answer is like kind of maybe, right? Like it the the real situation is we don't have enough context. We know what got done. We know what got, kind of assigned to people and got done and things like that. But usually that doesn't tell the whole story. Because if there's a delay in the project or something like that, it's not like often it's not because of something internal. It's because like, some downstream dependency didn't pan out, or you have an external vendor that's late or something like that. So the information just wasn't complete enough to give enough context to the AI to actually give you like the most useful update.
One of the beauties of linear is simplicity and experience. When you think about an AI project, whether you run them as a separate product or in the same actual product suite, how do you think about integrating these successful projects into the core product without causing blows?
Yeah, I think the goal here is the opposite of flow, right? I think bloat happens when you think purely additively. You're like, hey, we have to keep all of our existing features, and then we're gonna like give you a sidebar where you could chat with your database or something like that, right? Like it's kind of like a naive way of tacking something on. The way that we've thought about it is, what are the activities that you're probably doing right today, maybe even doing inside of Linear, that are valuable, but they take uh, time and attention. And how do we like replace those actions, right? So like hopefully what this means is that certain things you were doing, Linear, you're just gonna stop doing, right? If you were labeling issues according to like what application component that they were on, or kind of going through triage queue and routing it to like the right team to work on it. Hopefully we can actually just replace that activity altogether, right? That you have something, there's enough information right inside of Linear for the AI to make that decision on your behalf, right? At an acceptable and like tolerable accuracy level, where it's more cost effective for you to just deal with the exceptions than for you to actually continue to do that activity.
How do you think about quantifying the ROI of some of these AI products for customers? You mentioned time there. Are there any other metrics that you use?
Yeah, I think quantifying some activities you can quantify in very direct, sort of simple ways, right? Like you're just kind of like, hey, we would have spent X amount of time on this before, and now we're spending less time, or we would have spent this many people would have worked on it, and now fewer people work on it. And I think that that's like the first order kind of way of thinking about it. But the sort of second order way of thinking about it is, what did we do? Like, what did we end up doing that we just wouldn't even have done in the past because of how expensive it was? So you can think of kind of agents that fix really low level underlying bugs, right? That are like pretty simple to do, but you have to go through the whole process of like opening a PR and like figuring out exactly what code to change and making the change and waiting for CI, all this kind of stuff. And just no one gets to it, right? It's just never high on anyone's priority list, right? So you could probably have an agent that is capable of doing those sort of low effort bugs, and not just doing, you know, the ones that you think about, but just doing all of them, right? And like, so you go from this assumption of like, our users are always going to be dealing with these little annoying low level bugs to, though that class of error just is not a business anymore, right? And like, how do you quantify that? You can quantify it in terms of in terms of just like, well, how much effort would have taken an engineer to do this, but it's not really quite right, because you wouldn't have asked your engineers to do that in the first place because of how expensive it was.
What would you say is something that product leaders haven't woken up to yet about AI?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a lot of impact on how we form our teams, right? If you think about like how product teams are constructed, right? You have this sort of ranking of like, oh, who's going to do the strategic stuff, and who's going to do the more tactical things, and who's going to do all the like the really kind of like detailed diligence work that is kind of thankless, but it's like necessary. A lot of times we grow our teams because of that last kind of work, right? And there's so much labeling to do, or there's so much individual diligence that you have to have. Just people like on the ground, working through ideas, that you end up having a really large team as a result, and it creates a lot of like communication overhead. And I think that the biggest impact ultimately of AI for product managers, right, is that the we're not going to require so much diligence, right, on our teams, right? And we think about AI as people use a phrase like intelligence on tap, right? You just put some coins in and the intelligence comes out, and it's actually diligence on tap, right? Because computers are extremely diligent, right? You can ask a computer to do a thing and it's going to do it for 100 hours straight without complaining. The problem was that was limited before to like mathematical calculations, and now you can ask it to do like little bits of reasoning constantly, right? So like we're not going to have to do that sort of work anymore, which means that like when we're hiring, right, you can fit a lot more on people's point of view, people's like product taste, design sensibility, and a lot less than like, is this person willing to go through the monotonous, mundane aspects of product management?
Can you define diligence for us?
Yeah, I think just consistency,
Mm.
right? Like, if you want to do an activity, you want to do it with some amount of consistency, without, like without large gaps, do it in the same way every single time, do it across, like across whatever distribution that you have, like across different types of issues or across different geographies or things like that. Like anything where you have to have very good, consistent activity where any individual unit of work just isn't super consequential, but the sort of benefit is from the consistency and the volume of what you're doing. Like anything that fits that category is going to be, you know, like a lot easier to just like turn on by the push of a button.
What does this mean for how product teams operate? Has this changed anything in terms of like how your product team focuses at Linear?
Yeah, I think a very simple example of this, right? Like with a product that exists out there, it's like Bernola, right, which is a note taking app. And, we just don't have human note takers anymore. We just that's like a thing where it really rewarded diligence before, right? If you were really consistent about taking notes on every single meeting, then that way, just in case you had to go back and reference something, you'll always have it, right? It's not any individual set of notes is not gonna provide that much value, but the fact that you're consistent and diligent about it is where the value actually is. Like, that's like a type of activity that's been completely replaced by an AI product. And then the sort of consequence of that also is like, okay, well, there's a downstream effect of this, which is if you have some kind of like let's say you have like a key decisions dot in it, right? And it says like, hey, here are the key decisions or the open questions, and you want to update that, right? You should update it every single time you make a key decision. Like that rewards diligence, right? Otherwise, the document gets out of date. And what's that? Well, you can just have Claude do it for you now, right? Because I have consistent, kind of notes on every single meeting, then I can also just jam it into like a custom GPT or it's a cloud or something like that and just say, okay, now update the key decisions document with whatever the decisions we made in that meeting were. And all of a sudden you have what took a lot of diligence and effort before is just free.
You talk a lot about how critical product marketing is and starting with the customer is for building AI products. Can you take us through what this actually means day to day for you at Linear?
Yeah, I think, the philosophy that we've had at Linear is we have to solve real problems for real people. And I think that especially when you have like a very new technology like this, you typically have like a very sort of general purpose application in which all of the sort of base model chat apps kind of fulfill that niche. But then when you're trying to apply it to specific problems, it's very easy to have a mismatch between the promise of what you want to do or the hope of what you want to do and the actual product itself. So we have to really calibrate how we communicate about the product to end users, but also even shape the product so that we're able to fulfill those kinds of promises, right? Which is why we really start with duplicate detection, because like the most important aspect of it is that it's very falsifiable. Like people can like have a very good sense of like, is this giving me incremental value every single time they run into like a duplicate situation. But also it has the sort of underlying effect of changing the fundamental way that they work, right? So if you talk to a user and you say like, hey, like tell me the process of like receiving customer feedback and then filing like an issue against it. They'll probably say something like, well, first, if I heard it before, I'll go look up the issue, but other than I'll like make a new one. And I've been, like sometimes I search, I think I've heard it before, but like I can't find it, so I kind of shrug my shoulders and just make a new issue against it. And you know, we go from that process of like uncertainty, right? That people have expressed this emotion of like, well, there's a bit of uncertainty. There's some light work to be like, just file it, right? Just slam the issue into your database. If there's a dupe, we'll find it for you, right? It will detect it, and then we'll tell you like, hey, we found a dupe. You probably merge this, right? So it went from this feeling that they have about uncertainty to this feeling of like, there's a normal way to do this. I don't have to think about it anymore. I could just like make sure that I get clarification from the customer itself, so I can focus on like the human aspect of collecting requirements. And then once I've done that, I can just throw the context in, and then it'll integrate into the rest of the system. So I think like that's to like make this product, you kind of have to think about those sort of second order effects, right? Like not only does it solve the immediate problem, which you can kind of talk to people about, like, yeah, you detect dupes, great. But then you can help make a promise of like, okay, yeah, here's the second order effect. That moment tension that you have every single time you want to file an issue, you just forget about it. You don't have to have that tension anymore.
So let's dive into this specific example of duplicate detection. I'd love to start with how you actually work backwards from the customer there. So do you select a few customers? Is it entire base of customers? Like, what does that look like on a more practical level?
Yeah, on a very nuts and bolts level, like all of our features, like for the most part, like start with an internal build, right? We're power users of Linear. We use all of our most of our features, I would say, like on a day-to-day basis. So just to get a sense of like what the end user experience is like, we'll just use it ourselves for quite a bit of time. Especially when we're not sure if it's like good yet, right? And at some point we can feel like, okay, I think that this is good. It's probably good for some subset of our audience. If we have a good idea about, what that subset is, like, hey, companies in a particular line of business or a particular size or who have a particular org structure, we'll bring them on board to, do some beta testing with us and say like, hey, like we're gonna have this feature available to your workspace. Can you give us some feedback, like use it. And then we have both their qualitative feedback and also their usage stats, right, to see if they actually like utilize the thing. Uh, there's also a sort of default beta group if we don't have a very strong opinion about who exactly would benefit the most. We think it's like a general, the general audience would get some benefit from it. Uh, you know, there's about 5% of our audience is in our beta group, which is flip it on for them, and we'll just leave it on for them for a couple of weeks or even like a couple of months and sort of see, interact with the community, tell them, how the feature works, do a little bit of product marketing, right? We'll even like test out the product marketing messages with that beta group and just like, see what the response is. So it's a sort of gradual process of like releasing features to a wider audience.
Then you're focused on giving individual contributors superpowers. And one quote I loved that you said is, if we sacrifice any of the IC experience, we lose.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to dive into that. Like B2B companies in particular always face this tension, which is the buyer and the user itself. Whereas you've gone direct to the user. And I'm sure there's become a point where buyers who are ultimately paying for the tool want more reporting capabilities, more SSO, like more security features. Like, what does that tension look like for you? And how do you really approach this?
Yeah, I think for us, as much as anything, it's about deciding like what game you want to play. Right? And like we are happy to take on the challenge of providing really good, robust reporting features for middle managers without negatively impacting IC experience. And that's a particular that's a rule set for this product management game that you can decide to play or you can decide to ignore. Right? You can also kind of go the other way and say like, okay, we're fine, putting a bunch of like onerous kind of required fields and things like that for every single time you want to file an issue, and make the sacrifice the other way around. But we're making a bet, right? We're making a bet that the thing that's going to really benefit your reporting in the first place is very strong, consistent engagement from ICs. And the only way you're going to do that is by making sure that their experience is really excellent, like all the time.
Have you ever felt pressure from a buyer or a customer to be like, we just need these or we're going to churn?
Yeah, we certainly get pressure from customers for specific issues, but I think if you zoom out on, and I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have about kind of product teams or product leaders and things is they assume that those product teams and leaders have like this very very rigid point of view about what the process ought to be. But I think if you actually go and talk to, people on these teams and you be like, "Hey, tell me about your process," right? They'll tell you all of the sort of rigid ideas and concepts that they've sort of imagined. And then you ask them, "Okay, so tell me about the last time you did quarterly planning. What was that like?" They're like, "Well, it wasn't like that at all." Right? It was this improvised, kind of like chaos that we went through, and we're just glad that we got it over with. But the next time we're gonna follow this crazy process, right? And like, so I think what ends up happening is, it's not the revealed preference is that they're not as rigid about these things as it would appear. And if you're able to sort of provide them a path to getting through the planning, getting to clarity, that's really all they actually want.
You're known for asking really good customer interview questions. And I think that's a great one. It's like customer tells you hypothetical scenario, you anchor it back into like, when's the last time you did like a real example? Yeah. Any other questions you find really impactful for asking customers to actually get the best answers that inform development?
Yeah, I think something that PMs probably underutilize is like how did you feel in that situation, right? It's like it's trying to get at like what kinds of things made them feel very strongly. Like when were you like when were you like really happy about this? Like when did it really upset you? When's the last time you felt frustration? Right? Those kinds of questions. Because like that's obvious. It's not obvious that that's the right angle of attack into these questions because we kind of put on our scientist hats. We want to be very like thinky, right? We want to be very like procedural and fact based. But a lot of times the way that people decide to engage with a product or make a purchasing decision or whatever is literally how they made me feel. Like, if this thing makes me feel great every single time I use it, I'm buying it. Like, yeah. There's a feature list, then we can do the checkbox exercise, but like that's not really the thing that's gonna anchor my decision.
That's fascinating because you took on one of the biggest incumbents in the software development space here at the time, the golden standard. And feel is something you really lean into, like simplicity, beauty, speed. Talk us through that journey as much as you can share on like how did you think about counter positioning at the time and the more like targeted approach to actually leaning into a specific pain point that users had.
Yeah, so this isn't my story because I think Kari, one of the founders, CEO, he's kind of relayed this idea, but something that he experienced at Airbnb where he worked was the engagement with Jira at the time that they were deploying it. It just wasn't very good, and every single time people used it, it was like a groan, right? Like, oh, I have to open this, and like I have to deal with all the I don't know what half of these fields mean, like what's going on here, to the point where he built like a browser plugin that just erased all of the sort of stuff that didn't matter, right? And then like, made the UI nicer looking and stuff like that. And then like people just felt a lot better about it. He's like, that's all it took, right? Like I didn't develop any new features or whatever it is. I literally just deleted a bunch of features that no one wanted. And kind of made the information hierarchy like more obvious. So I think that there's something there that was like at the inception where he's like, okay, like this is how I know the thing has legs, right? This is how I know that there's an opportunity here is because like people have just like opted into this where we didn't build new features. We literally just took away stuff and made the thing like more clear and understandable.
Take us on the next stage of the journey. I think the initial positioning was the issue tracking tool you'll enjoy using, and then it moved to a better way to build products. So moving more broadly to a platform play. I guess, what signals took you on that journey to be like, we are ready to go multi-product and actually broaden out from there?
Yeah, I think a big part of it was, our best customers just got bigger, right? Like, and you would expect that, right? If your initial set of customers are, kind of fast growing startups that just like want to get their job done, if they're successful, they're gonna get bigger. And once they get bigger, they have to, manage more people. They have to manage more simultaneous projects. They have to manage a bigger backlog and all of this stuff. Which means that they need, ways to sort of aggregate all of these concepts into a, surface that they can reason out, right? If we think about linear as a communication tool about like, hey, here's what we should do and here's how it's going, they have to communicate about it at a higher level of abstraction. So it's a very sort of like natural kind of follow your customers. They're kind of like pulling the product out of you kind of situation.
Moving forward, how do you think about defensibility over time? Are there specific vectors you are looking at? And more broadly, like there is a sea of noise coming into the AI space now. How do you think about developing and growing a strengthening moat over time?
Yeah, I think a big part of I know a big part of this is that we want to maintain trust with our customers. I think the more noise there is, the less people are sort of naturally trusting of any kind of like bargaining claims or anything like that. So I think we're very careful about like not over promising. But I think we also want to remain really flexible to underlying fundamental changes. Like, one of the reasons that we want to be very open about having a platform that agents can act on is, we think that the sort of fundamental nature of software development, the economics, the workflows, and the assumptions are going to be just very different in the future. And like I think we're humble enough to know that we're not going to be able to predict the future, so we want to be as flexible as possible to sort of absorb any kind of impact.
When you think about back on your journey between product and AI at Linear, what is one product decision you are most proud of?
I think the one decision I think that I mean it's certainly made an inflection, but I think it sort of validated one of our core thesis is that like intake uh is like a really big concern at most companies. That like the hardest part about operating alongside a product org or even within a product org is that if you see something, you see like a bug or you have an idea, that you're able to express it in a way where you know that someone's going to look at it, where I know that this is gonna get to the right person, at the right time and be considered in like an appropriate way. And I think that it's very surprising how often that promise just isn't met, right? At sort of companies with sort of existing products. That like the equivalent of like file an issue is like no one looks at it. Like it goes into a black hole, no one sees it, right? The sort of idea that like if I put the effort into reporting something, that it will be appropriately dealt with is like a promise that we're able to sort of help our customers fulfill. And it's really been one of our key differentiating aspects.
When you look forward over the next 12 months, what are you most excited about at Linear?
I think we've been seeing the inklings of people really developing agents, but it's like kind of early days, right? We talked to a lot of folks who are uh, trying to cover different parts of the software development lifecycle, and they're all at different stage, right? Some of them are like, hey, we're really about to release our product, and other people are like, we have this idea, we think we can definitely do it. All of our experiments are pointing to yes. So and we've seen it on our platform too, right? We've seen people kind of like hacking the linear API to sort of have their agents start to interact with the rest of their users on the platform. So we're very excited about bringing in these agents as first class users, right? We've developed like a way for them to register as sort of full fledged team members that you can like invite different teams. You can assign the projects. You can you can do anything you can do with a human user, and and they're going to self identify as bots, so you know exactly who you're interacting with. And I think that it's going to be the sort of first step in like really changing the sort of fundamental assumptions about how software development happens.
No, I've absolutely loved this. Thank you so much for coming on AI Product Kitchen.
Yeah, awesome, great to be here.